Chernobyl is widely regarded as the worst environmental disaster in history, and while it may seem like a world away to most Americans, a similar incident occurred just a few hours' drive from New York City. The effects were so damaging that one member of the community described the disaster by altering the famous words of Thomas Paine, "Give me liberty, I've already got death." Here's the story of New York's Chernobyl. In many ways, Love Canal was your typical suburban neighborhood that wouldn't grab your attention as you passed by. But it hid a dark secret, one that not even the residents knew about. In August of 1978, that secret could remain hidden no longer. The residents of Love Canal were suffering. An eyewitness said, trees and gardens were turning black and dying. One entire swimming pool had been popped up from its foundation, afloat now on a small sea of chemicals. Children returned from play with burns on their hands and faces. While this might sound like something out of Fallout, it was real. Residents were confused and angry. They began to demand answers. What happened to our neighborhood? Could anyone have prevented this? Yes, they could have. Initially, the Love Canal neighborhood was intended to be a canal, hence the name. But by 1920, it became clear the project was never going to be finished, and the partially dug canal was turned into an industrial chemical dump site. From 1942 to 1953, the Hooker Chemical Company began to use Love Canal as a chemical waste dump. By the early 1950s, the canal consisted of around 21,000 tons of toxic chemicals, including 12 that were known carcinogens. In an internal company memorandum published in March of 1952, Bjarne Clausen, Hooker's vice president, wrote, "It may be advisable to discontinue using the Love Canal property for a dumping ground, but the damage was already done. Hooker now needed a buyer, and they would find an unlikely candidate." During the same period, the city of Niagara Falls was experiencing a population increase, and the Niagara Falls City School District needed land to build new schools. Hooker found their buyer. The next step was to absolve the company from any future liability. Hooker sold the 15-acre land to the Niagara Falls City School District for a mere $1, but discreetly added fine print which would release the company from all legal obligations should future lawsuits occur. The dump site was quickly covered with a clay seal to prevent leakage, and construction began. Since the land purchased by the city was for more than just schools, the city also began constructing low-income and single-family homes on adjacent land. Love Canal became an attractive neighborhood to potential residents with 800 private homes and 240 low-income apartments constructed over the following years. But the love would not last. In the late 1970s, investigative journalism revealed inexplicable illnesses in the Love Canal neighborhood: epilepsy, asthma, migraines, kidney disorders, and abnormally high rates of birth defects and miscarriages. Consecutive years of record rainfall in the area had raised the water table, causing the hazardous chemicals dumped by Hooker to leach into residents' basements, yards, and the playground of the elementary school. With news of the Love Canal tragedy spreading, the neighborhood became a national media event, with articles referring to it as one of the most appalling environmental tragedies in American history. It was time for the government to get involved, but their response was anything but sufficient. The community requested city officials to investigate the area, but they did not solve the problem. In fact, Niagara Falls Mayor Michael O'Loughlin even stated there was nothing wrong in Love Canal, and New York State officials called the residents hysterical housewives. United States President Jimmy Carter disagreed. On August 7, 1978, President Carter announced a federal health emergency and ordered the evacuation of 239 families. Over 700 families were deemed at insufficient risk to warrant relocation, even though tests by the New York State Department of Health revealed toxic substances were leaching into their homes. After national activism, President Carter ordered a second state of emergency in 1981, and the remaining families were evacuated. In total, about 2,200 people were evacuated from Love Canal. With an estimated $400 million in total damages, Hooker's decision to sell the land for a mere $1 and eliminate its liability seemed like the deal of a lifetime. But Hooker would soon learn they weren't off the hook. In 1995, Occidental Petroleum, Hooker's parent company, was sued by the EPA and agreed to pay $129 million in restitution for their negligent handling of the chemical disposal. By By 2004, the federal government announced the cleanup had concluded and residents began to move back into Love Canal. Potential residents were enticed by the low real estate prices and the promise that it was safe to move to the neighborhood. Unfortunately, real estate wasn't the only cost residents would bear. As of 2024, there are 17 active lawsuits relating to the Love Canal tragedy, with residents arguing that the chemicals are still harming them and their children. Unfortunately, Love Canal is only one example of corporate negligence damaging the health of the community. There are hundreds of similar cases across the United States where corporate profits are valued more than people's lives. Subscribe so you don't miss our next video, where we discuss how one corporation turned the air unbreathable for a poor county in eastern North Carolina.